All right, we will be calling the Committee of the Whole of Tuesday, June 23rd to order. And first, I'd just like to acknowledge, closer? Sorry, I'm not used to Mayor Tate's mic. So we'll do a First Nations recognition. We do appreciate the lands that we are on of the Sauk Nation. Beautiful place to live, work, and play. And we do have to do the ministerial order as well. And we'll just need one mover for this. And I can move them together? Okay. So the first is that council is holding this meeting without members of the public in attendance in accordance with Ministerial Order M192, as council chambers does not have the capacity to safely accommodate the unknown number of public participants wishing to attend, and that council is committed to ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability through the submission of written comment and the provision of live and recorded broadcasts of the meetings.
So
moved by Councillor Bateman. And all in favor? Carried unanimously. I just need approval of the agenda. We have 2 topics on this afternoon's agenda. Moved by Councillor Beddoes. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, I'll turn it over to Mr. McGuinness to introduce our speakers.
thank you, Madam Chair. We did not have any written submissions for the agenda items today. But today is an important day with the presentation of the Transportation and Parks and Trails Master Plan for the committee to consider. We'll be asking for a resolution to proceed with public engagement of the plans, but first just a couple words if I could. Thank you to Laura Hooper for her work in leading the District of Sauk's effort in completing the Parks and Trails Master Plan. Laura's capacity to produce quality work is a gift to this organization, and her team's efforts are very much appreciated. And Paul Butterfield should be very proud today to see the results of his months of work on the agenda. As Paul prepares to exit the organization this week, we thank him and wish him the very best of luck. Thank you very much, Paul. And next, Madam Chair, with your permission, I will introduce our 2 presenters and lead consultants for the 2 projects that will be presented today. Dan Casey is a transportation planner with Urban Systems in their Victoria office and was a consulting team lead for the Transportation Master Plan. The past 15 years, he's worked with communities in Western Canada to develop multimodal transportation plans, and recently was a lead author on the BC Active Transportation Design Guide. Dan is a longtime resident of Greater Victoria. Catherine Barris is a community planner and landscape architect with Urban Systems and was the consulting team lead for the Parks and Trails Master Plan. Catherine has over 30 years of experience working on parks, recreation, and trail projects throughout BC. Her work spans master planning and design, almost always involving a high level of community engagement. So Catherine, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Worship and Council. I will endeavor here to share my screen. Or actually, you see me now. So, I'll start by just saying it's a real pleasure to be here. It's been a very thorough process. We've enjoyed all of it, and it's been it's always fantastic to have some products to show and to be able to share them with you. So. Let's just see here. I will need maybe somebody to tell me just confirm that you can see the screen.
Yes, we can, Catherine. Thank you.
Okay, so you see the full slide taking up the screen at this point? You sound like you do. Okay, thanks. So when we began this process, this journey, it was very, very clear from the district that you wanted our transportation master plan and the Parks and Trails master plan to be done as what we called one process, 2 plans. And I'm hoping, and I believe we have accomplished that. All of our community engagement was done together. Dan and I have worked really closely together, as have Laura and Paul and your whole team. So we're really happy that it worked out that way, and I think together these documents will feed well into your OCP update, which I understand is beginning soon. We also were told from the very beginning that it was very important that these two plans align with your strategic plan. And that was pretty easy, because when we look at the values and goals of your strategic plan and the vision, an inclusive, healthy, self-sufficient community where the rainforest meets the sea, I mean, that really is completely related to what we're trying to accomplish with parks and trails and transportation planning. So it's all about community well-being, vibrancy, demonstrating leadership and long-term growth, and what you need to do to be a great community for all of your residents. So this is an overview of the process, and I'm aware, and it was great that many of you participated in that. It was very collaborative, especially in last winter of mainly 2019, when we held quite a few events for the community, and we did a lot of networking and engagement in the community. And these are just some of the images from the workshops and open houses that we held. Oh, I should say also, I meant to say, these first few slides are about both plans. And then I will go into the Parks and Trails Master Plan for a time. After Dan presents the Transportation Master Plan, he'll have a concluding slide or two that also relate to both plans. So we're integrating all the way here. In terms of participation, it was really important to us to reach out to as many people as we could. So we had two main open houses. Each had approximately 60 people. At the first open house, we had two breakout rooms where Dan and I each conducted two sets of workshops, and these were visioning sessions, and they were at the very beginning of the process, asking people what's important to them and trying to hear each other's views and build up some consensus around the directions that the plans needed to take. It was really important to try to make sure that we were being reflective of the aspirations and needs of the community. The online survey, transportation won us, beat us by just a little bit, but we both had over 300, which we consider a really good response rate for a community this size. In the days when we use statisticians a lot, 300 was typically the break-even point that they used to cite as a statistically valid survey. And then we both did a series of workshops and interviews. We'll talk at the end about one more event to take place in the future. So SUC has been growing steadily, and it's projected to continue that steady growth. And that means that as your population is increasing, you're actually in the good position of being able to provide more amenities. We work in some communities in BC where the population is not growing, and it's much more difficult to get good amenities and resources, and even to repair assets. So this, I think, helps you in this regard. We worked with your planning department to come up with a map of future growth potential. So we have here your high, moderate, and low growth potential areas in the various shades of pink. That color chosen by our GIS person extraordinaire on the project. Anyway, you can see these are related to your servicing area and the overall community growth area that's in the regional plan. So I'm now going to go into the Parks and Trails Master Plan. This is an overview of the organization of the plan, and I'm going to mainly talk about Section B, which is our main topic areas, and what we found out for each of these topics and what our key recommendations are. Actually, I'm not quite doing that yet. I first have a slide about the major inputs. So when we did our sort of initial engagement with the community, one of the questions was trying to figure out where they felt that the district should be making investments. And you're going to see these similar topics popping up as I go through here, but the key ones that came back were always number one, build more trails. And that's kind of cool because that is obviously very interrelated with the transportation master plan. Provide more waterfront access, improve wayfinding for parks and trails, dog off leash areas. We talked a lot about dogs, and amenities, just set a couple examples, washrooms and a spray park. What did people see as the key challenges? The need for more connectivity, and these again are similar themes. Waterfront, new development, the concern there is that the new development areas are getting the same quality and quantity of parkland that you already have in your developed area. So, and in some cases there were concerns that that was not happening. Need for good park amenities. We heard about park management, which I'm not getting into this a lot in the presentation, but in the report, you'll see you have a record number of jurisdictions managing your parkland, which in the long run, I think is something that it would be great to try to reduce the number so that it could be more efficient. And then many concerns about the environment. Many people obviously choose to live in Souk for the environment, and so it's really important to them that it be protected. The vision is really simple. Parks and trails protect the environment, connect activities, and support our recreation from the rainforest to the sea. And the goals build off of that. So good quality, inclusivity, talked about connectivity quite a bit, making sure that your trails and parks are connecting to lands in the jurisdictions beyond Souk, waterfront environment, all of this we'd already talked about. So the goals obviously build on what people see as the needs and the challenges. So now getting into the topic areas, the key finding, Souk residents love their trails. The participation rate was extraordinary for people who regularly use trails. And so the key direction is expand the trail network to improve connectivity and add amenities supporting those trails. And this is things like signage and benches and washrooms. As being the very top priority of this master plan. If you had to pick one thing, it has to be trails. We have 4 different trail types, and these kind of overlap. So we have the off-road multi-use pathway. The roadside multi-use pathway is coinciding with those in the transportation master plan. And then stepping down, the next is an urban pathway. These are typically connector sidewalks between cul-de-sacs and routes like that. And then we also have the nature trails. So we have, this is a map of existing and proposed trails. I know this is probably hard to read. I don't know what size screens you have. The main point of showing this district-wide trail is to show you how the trails do connect to the surroundings. The green dots are trailheads. So the dark green are existing trailheads and the light green with the P are proposed trailheads, because trailheads become really important infrastructure to help support the use of the trails, and the trailheads are also, of course, interlinked with the transportation master plan. Looking at the town center, the dashed lines here are the proposed trails, and you can see that you have some fantastic trails, but they really aren't well connected with each other. So by connecting these solid lines with the dashes, you will enable people to get on a bike or go for a walk and just get to the main parts of Souk. Next one is parkland. And we measure it using several different methods. No matter which method you choose, you have a pretty good supply of parkland in relation to your land area, in relation to your population. The key direction here is there are a few neighborhoods that are deficient in parks. So it would be great to get more parkland in those particular areas. and also to make sure that you get parkland to serve new development. So this map is showing you with the 3 dashes, Town Centre, West Souk, and Whiffen Spit, especially Town Centre and West Souk, where you can see from the map with the greens and the yellow being walking distance to parkland that, you know, there really is not a lot of parkland in those areas. Whiffen Spit is a different kind of neighborhood. There, what they're lacking is the play area and really neighborhood park type of use. The letters A through K, ish, JK, whatever they are, those are where we think future development is most likely to occur in the future growth area. So wherever there is a major development, what we have done is we've given a lot of standards and guidelines for acquiring parkland in new developments. This was one of the main asks of staff at the beginning of the process, that they were saying we need direction on what to ask for from developers. So we have given a lot of that type of direction. Next topic is park amenities. So in general, you have most of the amenities that one would expect in a community of your size. Key direction is to provide more playgrounds. As I said, there are a few neighborhoods that do not have good playgrounds, or asset management is part of this and the need to replace playgrounds on a reasonable cycle. You really need a new spray park. There's demand for more picnic and definitely washroom facilities that enable people to stay out longer, more comfortably. Your courts, the tennis courts are there, but you don't have a lot of like multi-sport courts and things that help to attract more youth in particular. And like I said before, dog off-leash areas. Not having any, that really is a gap for a community like yours. So this map is showing some of the existing picnic and play areas. We've mapped all of the different amenities, and this one is showing the walking distance to playgrounds in the yellow color. So you can see that some areas are well served, but certainly not in the entire district. Next is the waterfront. Of course, you have an amazing waterfront with some incredible trails and walkways to it. The key direction is to have more public access to and along the waterfront. So building off a study that you had done some years ago, we've mapped all of the existing water access, and this is the ocean as well as the rivers, and we've identified potential waterfront access points, and some of these are ones that exist, but they really need infrastructure. Other ones need upgrading of infrastructure, and other ones really don't have anything. There are some that are not suitable for a lot of development, but we identify what are the upgrades needed and where. And finally, the environment. So Souk residents, as I said, highly value this. And the key direction here is to protect environmental values during land development and preserve and enhance the urban forest. So to get the rainforest to the sea really happening, the riparian corridors are your key to that, we think, and really making sure that you have good protection areas around all the rivers and creeks, so that you can have protection of the environment and ideally trails outside the most important protected area. And the urban forest, people talked a lot about the urban forest and wanting to make sure that it is protected and enhanced. This is a map of the environmental resources that are available for mapping, and really they're, with any new development, it's really important that these get mapped and properly protected and accounted for. And not to mention the protecting the riparian corridor along the ocean front, so that when development occurs, there's an opportunity to have public access along the waterfront is also a key strategy. So we have developed in both plans our action items. We have short, medium, and long-term improvements, and then future possibilities that go even beyond that. First, I'm going to talk about some of your bylaws need upgrading to help support this plan. One is the subdivision servicing bylaw, and so we've listed all the topic areas that need to be enhanced in that bylaw. The community parks regulation bylaw is really outdated. We would like to see you get a new tree protection bylaw, a dog management bylaw, and then, of course, any recommendations here that are relevant for inclusion in the OCP and zoning would transfer over into those plans. Policies and plans, there needs to be a strategy for parkland acquisition, including waterfront access. And so this is something that it's just important to have in place so that when opportunities arise, you know you're ready to potentially take advantage of property acquisition opportunities. A park naming policy, and we've given some thoughts around that. We think that 3 of your key parks really need master plans. The John Phillips Memorial Park, we recognize, had a plan a number of years ago, but things have changed since that time, and it really should have an update. Whiff and Spit needs a management plan, master plan, and then your new town center park will need one for sure, because it'll be a different type of park than some of the others you already have. Your cemetery, we're told, is nearing capacity. The best way to deal with that is to do a cemetery master plan that projects your needs for cemetery services and figures out how to handle them. And then an urban forest strategy related to the comments about protecting the urban forest. The capital development part of the action items are focusing on trails and their infrastructure, like we talked about, park amenities and asset management and renewal. I have 3 slides here that lay out the priorities for the short and medium terms and the relative cost. I'm not going to talk about these individually because it's just too detailed, but I'm happy to come back to this slide, or you can scan it and we can talk about it later. So definitely the key new trails, especially in the town center area, would be the most important ones. A few of the waterfront access points. And so what we've done here on the town center map is the purple are the short-term priority trails, and the teal are the medium-term priority trails. In terms of parkland, I talked about that and the master plans. Park amenities, once you have the plans, there will be a need to build accordingly. Some of the top priorities are Spray Park, which may be at Sea Park, a playground, few playgrounds actually. We've identified parks where we think they're most in need, some picnic areas, washrooms, and upgrading the ball diamonds and tennis courts at Art Morris. Establishing dog off-leash areas. So ideally, everyone should be within walking distance of a dog off-leash area. We know that's not necessarily going to come right away, but at the very minimum, there should be one north of the highway and one south of the highway. A sports court at Sun River, which we know there have been lots of discussions about. And then we've identified some of the higher priorities for establishing waterfront access points. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I will maybe just go back up a slide. Happy at this point to take any comments or questions.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Any comments or questions from council? Oops, Councillor Beddoes.
First of all, thank you for that very comprehensive Parks and Trail Master Plan. It was very interesting reading. I particularly like the part about the dogs, that Suk, the respondent, 62% own dogs, and that we have 2,500 dogs in town. So if we could only tax them and get some money for some of these improvements, we'll be good. No, I have no real specific things. They're all good ideas. The hardest part is going to come up with the money to action some of them. But again, thank you for all the hard work you've done on it. Very pleased with it. Thank you.
jump in?
Oh, sorry, that's what's happening. I guess it's the mics. Yes, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, again, thank you for this plan. It's practical and visionary, realistic, yet also aspirational. So I think both plans speak extremely well for the district, and I would imagine anyone investigating our community as a resident or investor will be pleased and excited to see a true 2020 document here. Yeah, there's so much to absorb here. I think I might wait until I hear the Transportation Master Plan before speaking generally. A couple of things. Two things I found, I'll focus on the two things that seem to be missing here. One is programming in parks, i.e. getting people into parks. I know one of the trends these days is unstructured activities, as you've identified in the report. I'm interested in terms of quality and inclusivity, parks programming, and whether that might have been something you'd have investigated.
I might leave Laura to say a bit more about that. It's not one of the current functions of the district of SUC to do programming in parks. Laura, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I'll just add through your worship that's exactly the case. We focus on the maintenance and construction in the district and leave the recreational opportunities through Sea Park. And I know that we had discussed along the development of this plan the idea of partnering more fulsomely with Sea Park to ensure that we could start engaging in programming. But I guess it didn't come up as an immediate priority, but that's something we can consider adding through your worship.
Yeah, okay. So again, I'm just nitpicking here. This is a wonderful document. The other piece I missed was viewpoints. A viewpoint as an opportunity for motorists and people with accessibility issues to get up to the heights. We have magnificent views out there. I'm wondering if that was considered.
That's a really good question, and I don't recall hearing anyone ever mention that, so it did not hit our radar. I'm aware you have beautiful viewpoints, and we were taken to some of them, but and I think you already have parks at some of those viewpoints, but it wasn't particularly raised. We talk about viewpoints in relation to the waterfront, because some of the waterfront access points that are there are never going to be physically accessible because the bank is too steep, but they do serve as viewpoints, and we've acknowledged that. But as far as ones higher up, we have not pick that up, but that also is something that could be added.
And I guess I had an interest in how, if any SWOT exercise had been done on the previous plans. And I know with our OCP, for example, there were 140 action items listed in the 2010 OCP, of which the district managed to tackle 18 over the last decade. So I'm curious about your feedback about the then and now of these two plans.
We did, with the help of your staff, we did do a very extensive analysis of the previous Parks and Trails Master Plan. I can't remember the number of recommendations, but it was in the hundreds, and over 100, well over 100, I believe. And we have this very detailed Excel spreadsheet that included which ones were accomplished, which in fact was not too many, which ones are still valid and which ones are no longer valid. And all of that we used to feed into this master plan to make sure that we were picking up the ones that were still valid but not accomplished.
Okay. Because I do believe action item number 1 in the 2008 plan or 9 plan was this river crossing for bikes. And I don't see any reference to that in the current plan.
I believe we have a river crossing as one of our proposed trail links.
Okay, I missed that. I'm going to keep reading. I've gone through twice. It's such wonderful plans, really. The depth of them, particularly the width and spit thoughts on the master plan there, and getting some details on what that might entail. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome, Mayor Tate. We'll give you a moment to set up. We're just discussing the Parks and Trails Master Plan report. Just received a excellent presentation from Catherine on that, and we're in question and comment. I know that the bylaw, I believe the bylaw states that since you're here now, we switch over to you as chair.
That is correct.
Okay. But we'll give you a moment to set up shop if you'd like. And
Take a brief recess for a minute or two and we can wipe down your station.
all right, we'll have a brief recess just to sanitize, and we'll be right back.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience, and my apologies for the late arrival here. I broke my glasses, so if I'm making weird expressions, it's because I broke my glasses. Anyway. Okay, so I understand that we've just received, we're in the middle of the presentation, is that correct, on Parks and Trails? Comments in process. Okay, so Councillor Bateman, you were speaking. Are you complete? Okay. Other members of council then? Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for the work that's gone into these plans. They both look really good, very exhaustive, and although they started before my time, I'm happy that they've been done, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they meld with the OCP review. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Loggins, thank you for chairing the meeting. And comments, please.
You are very welcome. Yes, I wanted to thank you, Catherine, for the presentation. And for your work in this, as well as everyone else who participated. It's very comprehensive. And I wanted to just comment that my personal favorite piece of this is the policy revisions timeline. It makes things way more easy to swallow because I know we have a lot of work to do, and having that laid out is very helpful for me personally, especially going into our strategic planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Beddoes, any comment? Or did you comment?
So I am done.
So you are done, okay. And I apologize to everyone if this is repetitive. I understand you were probably discussing the Demonmule Creek or Little River Crossing when I came in, and I missed that. Could you just give me, just for my indulgence? Oh, you're talking about Whiff and Spit. But I know that we have started plans about the crossing from Little River to the schools, so I just wanted it, if you could just maybe elaborate a bit about that, please.
Catherine, I muted your microphone when we were on our break, so you'll need to turn it back on.
Okay, do you hear me now? Okay, so yes, I was saying that it is one of our proposed trail connectors. We actually didn't mention it specifically as a bridge, but it is one of our it is a proposed trail connector that obviously needs a bridge. Laura, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just, for clarification, Catherine, to your worship, we were talking about the crossing of the Sioux River when you arrived, but the Demonmule Creek pedestrian crossing that crosses Demonmule Creek is, I believe, outlined specifically in the Parks and Trails Master Plan as a priority.
Okay, that's great. I like the word priority because I just think this is a really exceptional opportunity here for active transportation to and from the schools, connecting the neighborhoods, and we've started it. So it's just getting the rest of it finished there with them, and that would be exciting. No, but otherwise, this is excellent, and I thank staff just for the larger publications as well, because these will be just good to have on hand and to refer to in the future, a bit easier to read. Okay, so I don't have anything further. So, Councillor Bateman, yeah?
Yeah, so I guess over the next couple of months, there will be further opportunities because we're going to have another public open house on this to answer these kind of detailed questions. But just for my own curiosity, this Knott Brook Trail that is recommended here as a short term, I see that, I'm just curious as how would that require land acquisition to get from Caldwell over to Maple? Laura?
Through your worship, yes, sorry, I was trying to picture Councillor Bateman, the connection. Yeah, that connection would require land acquisition or a statutory right-of-way of some sort or easement with the existing property owners to have that complete.
Yeah. And then on a similar subject on the, I guess I'm looking at the priority trails map now, and there is the linear park that would run over to the West Coast Road through the along the sewer servicing route, right?
That's correct.
That would be a longer term possibility.
That's right.
10 years or more.
Through the same sort of acquisitions or easements or right-of-ways,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, very exciting. I know this is a 10-year plan, and yet the waterfront and all of the proposed trails long-term really give us a master plan for the next 50 years, I would suspect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So there are a few recommendations here. The first one is then that Council receive the Parks and Trails Master Plan draft report for information. Moved by Councillor Beddoes. Any discussion? See none. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. And the second part then is that Council authorize public engagement on the draft report. That'll be really exciting. moved by Councillor Bateman. Discussion? Councillor Logans?
Do we have a timeline with that, or is it going to be sort of with the OCP process?
You want me to answer? We have a proposal for July 9th for a virtual open house, which I think our idea was to talk about the details of that after we do both plans. Is that correct? Because we're going to do them together. But I'm happy to go on more now if you want to. or if you'd rather hold it, that's fine.
Be good maybe just to get a sense of what that will look like on that day.
Okay, so the idea was to hold, first of all, the plans would be posted at least a week ahead of that so that people would have an opportunity to view them, and notices would go out by emails to the contact list and social media, letting people know that the draft plans are ready for review. We actually have a press release already drafted. And then for the open house, people would have to, again, big social media and advertising, they'd have to register in advance. The forum would be Zoom. And the idea is when people enter the Zoom call, they'd have the opportunity to enter one of two rooms. And in the Parks and Trails Master Plan, Laura and I would be hosting that room. The transportation would be Dan and Paul. And we essentially envision this as if we were standing in a room and people could come and ask questions or make comments, and we could have this PowerPoint available. We could also have the plan available so that we'll share screens as needed with any topic they might raise, and essentially have it be quite informal within that forum, and people can come and go as they please. So we're trying to get as close to an open house experience as we can.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. No, that's good news. It may be good just to get a save the date out there, sooner rather than later. We may have some community organizations that have that would want to participate. So at least then they would know that this is out there, and we can firm in more details. But if just a suggestion that it's not that far off, and it would be good to get as many opportunities or people involved as possible. Okay, so seeing that then, thank you. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? And that too is carried unanimously. That's wonderful. I just realized I neglected to check to see if there was any public input. I don't see that there was any. Okay, I'm late with that. Okay, sorry. Okay, next up is item 5.2, the Transportation Master Plan Draft Report. Over to staff.
Yes, go ahead, Dan. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. And perhaps if someone could confirm on that end that we're seeing a slide with a picture of Church Road and the Transportation Master Plan title.
We are, thanks. Go ahead, Dan.
Good, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us here today and having us help you develop these master plans. I know it's been quite a rewarding process for myself and our team here at Urban Systems, working with your residents, working with your stakeholders, working with your staff to come up with what you see in front of us. So thank you for that. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes to give a high-level overview of the Transportation Master Plan. Catherine already set the stage earlier at the beginning of her slide presentation on how these two master plans, the Parks and Trails Master Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, really were developed together as one cohesive process. So that encapsulated the background research, the analysis, the reaching out to the public and stakeholders, as well as the preparation and the final documents you see in front of you. So I just wanted to reiterate that when I start to show some of the key action items from the Transportation Master Plan and some of the network plans you'll see, take comfort in knowing that those were developed hand in hand with the corresponding action items in the Parks and Trails Plan. So the organization of the Transportation Master Plan, it's been organized very similarly to the PTMP. It's organized into 3 key sections. The first is Section A, is the process and setting. It really sets the stage overall for the document and dives into some of the background understanding of the community and policies that was undertaken. Section B is focused on analysis and actions. It's been divided up into 5 different modal sections, so walking and rolling, cycling, transit, complete streets, and new mobility. And I'll spend some time in a few minutes exploring each of those in a little bit more detail. And finally, Section C is entitled The Plan, and really it is the path forward for how we're going to achieve the high-level directions and the specific actions and priority items that are identified throughout the plan. And I'll circle back on Section C at the end of this presentation as well. So we started this out with wrapping our heads around what the key challenges are here for transportation and mobility. They're highlighted there in the plan, but also in the 7 bullets that are on the screen there. A couple real key ones. The first one there is around street network connectivity. And so we noticed right off the bat that you've got a street network that a number of roads aren't continuous or don't connect, and that can be a real challenge. Another one is around rural road design. And so a lot of your roads you inherited prior to Souk being a municipality. And so they've still at the point where their look and feel is as they were designed in past. Another key item here on the challenges side of things is low density. And so you've got some residential neighborhoods that there's not a lot of, say, commercial or employment or service opportunities that are within walking distance. That prevents a challenge in terms of getting people to walk or to bike more often. On the right side of the screen, just some key figures around your travel mode split, how people get around. Of note, on the left-hand side, auto drivers, you've got a fairly high percentage of single occupant vehicle trips that are made. Counter to that, you've got a low percentage of cycling trips that are made. And then of interest is your public transit statistics. You have, Souk has a very high percentage of regional trips. So trips that are beyond Souk itself, a very high percentage of those made on the bus by transit, which sort of harks back to this key challenge of a number of people making regional commuting trips on a daily basis. So we use this background analysis phase, understanding of key challenges, to start to craft the plan. And some of the upfront higher level pieces include this vision. So the vision for the TMP really describes what, once the plan itself is realized, what Souk and what transportation in Souk looks like. So the vision is Souk is a community where people of all ages and abilities meet their day-to-day mobility needs using a variety of travel options that are convenient, safe, connected, and support Souk's aspiration to be a healthy, vibrant, and sustainable community. In support of that vision, 6 goals are identified. And just very quickly, they are multimodal transportation options, sustainable transportation, partnerships, so that's working with and realizing some of these goals through land development or adjacent jurisdictions. Other key goals: connectivity, community livelihood, and investment, making sure investments are balanced and equitable. Also important are these shaping priorities. And these give shape to what the key directions of the plan are. And so maybe a couple to highlight here around complete streets. And so this idea that the municipality and its public spaces, largely the public spaces, are either parks or they're streets, they're street right-of-ways. And so those street right-of-ways are an opportunity to achieve more than simply vehicle movement, and to think more broadly about how we lay out, design, and allocate the space within street right-of-ways. Another key shaping priority is this idea of all ages and abilities, or AAA is an acronym you'll hear thrown around occasionally. And so the idea with that is we look to, there's a phrase called 8 to 80. If we design for 8-year-olds, if we design for 80-year-olds, we've adequately designed for everyone else in the middle. And so that's a real underlying philosophy or approach to this plan, is making sure that, and I'll get into this a little bit with some of the facility design pieces, is making sure that we are designing for all demographics within the community. And lastly, targets are established upfront specific to transportation from your community energy and emissions plan. And they speak just quickly to trip distance reduction. So either land use or transportation directions in order to reduce typical trip distances. Modal shift, so moving more people toward walking and cycling away from single occupant vehicle travel. Among vehicle travel, making it as efficient as possible. And then lastly, electrification of the vehicle fleets. Okay, so that's setting the stage. That's section A of the plan. I'm going to move now into section B, which is the analysis and action section. And I mentioned earlier it's organized around each of the kind of the key travel modes. And so that's how we'll work our way through this next piece of material. So first is walking and rolling. Some of the key district policies that are stated right up front in this section are around connecting neighborhoods to the town center, schools, recreation, and public transit. It's achieving high-quality pedestrian facilities, both through frontage improvements associated with future land development. Back to this idea of planning and designing for people of all ages and abilities. That includes universal design, so the idea that we design facilities that are inclusive to all and are without barrier, and that largely revolves around creating an accessible community. On the right-hand side is a pie chart just showing that we have a lot of work to be done. 80% of the streets in Souk do not have sidewalks, so we have our work cut out for us. Next, this is in the plan as the future walking network. And so this is identifying existing and future walking facilities or existing and future walking routes. Importantly, the plan doesn't prescribe exactly which route will get a sidewalk or which route will get a roadside trail or exactly how wide those sidewalks might be. It identifies the routes and then leaves some flexibility as to when a project or a route is going to be pursued. There's then a menu and some guidance given on what appropriate facility types are and how they should be designed. And so I've highlighted a few here on the slide, some of the key ones, and we won't bother with like the dimensional details of this, but at a high level, we are talking about sidewalks adjacent the roadway. We are then talking about, where possible, sidewalks that actually are buffered from the roadway with a boulevard space that might include landscape or trees or stormwater management. Or we're talking about roadside multi-use pathways. And so the photo at the bottom is shown is from Wadham's Way, which is what you've got there is a great, I use this photo in other communities. It's a great example of what we want a roadside multi-use pathway to look like. Next, on to the cycling network. So some of the key district policies related to cycling are about creating a well-connected network of safe and comfortable cycling facilities. And again, with this AAA, all ages and abilities in mind. Establishing a key east-west alternative to cycling on Highway 14. We'll get to that in a sec. Prioritizing cycling safety when we're planning and designing cycling facilities, and that includes consideration of physically separated cycling infrastructure wherever possible. So we actually have physical barrier, something physical between where the vehicles travel and where the cyclists travel. And also around endpoint facilities and short-term and long-term bicycle parking to make sure that when you arrive at your destination, you're greeted with a proper, safe, and sort of confidence-inspiring facility to lock your bike. And so again, here's the future cycling network. Similar to the walking and rolling network, we're concerned with existing and future routes, and we're talking about routes that will exist at the roadside versus routes that will exist off the road and are therefore pathways. And a few of the sort of key lines on the map we'll say here on the cycling network include this east-west connection that builds on Wadham's Way, which is already in place, and includes an extension of Throop Road to the east and an improved facilities on Grant Road to the west. Roddenite, connecting Otter Point Road to the schools as well as another key connection. In terms of facility types, so similar again to the walking and rolling network, we're not being prescriptive necessarily with exactly which facility goes on exactly which route, but we have provided a menu of facility types that give guidance to what road types or what situations are suitable for which cycling treatments, also dimensionally and how these facilities are designed. So some of the key ones: roadside multi-use pathway. This is same as the walking and rolling network. This is a shared facility, pedestrians and cyclists and other users. Then specific to cyclists, protected bike lanes. So this is something that provides physical barrier, physical separation between the cycling facility and the roadway. Buffered, preferred, or painted bike lanes is another option shown top right. Key there, and you can see it in the photo, is having a physical space. It might just be painted, but it's offset from the roadway to give cyclists a comfortable space to operate in. We want that buffering wherever we can. Obviously, constrained locations might not always be achievable, but that is the target. And then lastly, shown on the bottom right is neighborhood bikeway. And so neighborhood bikeways, it's a kind of a newer line of thinking around cycling infrastructure, but rather than to build in infrastructure that can be costly and is needed specifically to provide a comfortable cycling experience, we can select routes that are continuous, that might also be traffic calmed, that rather than sort of design with the cyclist in mind, it's treatments that then manage and slow vehicle speeds and vehicle volumes, so those roads inherently become comfortable to bike on. So that's our neighborhood bikeway treatment, which typically is reserved for local residential streets. Moving on to public transit. So you recently, working with BC Transit, there was a local area transit plan that was finalized. And so the Transportation Master Plan speaks to public transit. Really, it takes its direction on future bus routing and service levels from that local area transit plan, and then sort of focuses its attention on infrastructure, bus stops, exchanges, and the like. And so some of the key district policies specific to public transit in the Transportation Master Plan. First one is very important, is coordination between land use planning and multimodal access to public transit. And so we can do a lot in terms of encouraging people to ride the bus, use transit, by how we lay out land use. Continuity with the SUC local area transit plan is another key policy direction. Providing safe, comfortable, and accessible bus stops. Relocation of the town center transit exchange, as well as creating and upgrading park and rides and mobility hubs, is another key direction. On the screen is the future transit network, and so, like I mentioned, the sort of the future routing. The TMP takes its direction from the local area transit plan, which talks about a sort of a three-tiered routing hierarchy. So there'd be the regional routes, there'd be local routes, and then there'd be the rural routes. Also of importance on here is expansion of park and rides and consideration of mobility hubs, which the idea is these are points of interchange where an individual could arrive at or leave from using a number of different modes. So it's facilitating multimodal trip making. So that might be a high quality bike locker at a key bus stop that allows someone to ride their bike to the bus. They don't want to put it on the bus, lock it up, continue the trip on the bus. So it's really about facilitating multimodal trips. Support facilities. The Transportation Master Plan includes a recommendation for investment in bus stops over time. It also talks about what some of those key sort of first investments might be, key locations, and it gives direction to what a good bus stop should include: shelter, bench, garbage bin, signage, etc. The plan also talks to the town center transit exchange and relocation over time to Wadham's Way, where there's planned growth as well as the ability to accommodate more buses. It also talks about park and rides and mobility hubs, which I just spoke to a minute ago. So on to complete streets. I mentioned this early on, is that this idea of complete streets and sort of re-envisioning, reconsidering how we divvy up the space within the road right-of-way is a real key direction for this plan. And so that's why the title of this chapter is Complete Streets. You'll see in a lot of other community transportation master plans, it's just called streets or street network or road network. We really thought that this underlying philosophy of complete streets was important in this case. And so we've structured this section around this idea of achieving complete streets. So some of the key directions, again, around connectivity, is around joint planning with the province, with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, specifically on Highway 14, and improvements that might be made along there that, although not necessarily Souk's jurisdiction, go a long way to influencing mobility needs and improvements in the district. We've also identified a number of locations for intersection and complete street improvement projects, and I'll talk to a few of those here. So the Complete Streets Network, as it is in the plan, includes, it is this map, it includes a number of different street classifications, from highway, arterial, collector, town center, local, and then ultimate build-out. And so worth noting that past Transportation Master Plan from 2009 and the existing current OCP, arterial is a new road classification. It's something that's been added and applied to Throop and Grant, as well as to Otter Point Road. And so the idea there is that those are your most major municipal roads, and a more significant design treatment is desired for those. And so I'll introduce those in a second. Also worth noting a number of new connections identified on the Complete Street Network, and this layer of ultimate build-out. And so the idea with those, it's primarily up in the northwest kind of Broom Hill area. And the idea with those is they're not actively pursued in the life of this plan, but that through planning of those lands, as things proceed in future, we don't do anything that doesn't allow us to make those connections when the time comes. So it's really about preserving corridors and making sure that we achieve those when the time comes. So we thought it important that those made it in. So I'll walk through very quickly the complete street cross sections, and these are broken down by street classification, the classifications I just went through. And so on this first slide are the arterials. And so the version on the left would be applied to Grant Road and Throop. And this is consistent with the memorandum of understanding that's been struck with the ministry for that corridor. On the right is a 20-meter version of an arterial street, and that would primarily be applied on Otter Point Road and any other roads that were classified arterial in future. And 20 meters generally can be achieved within the road right-of-ways that are in place generally. Down to collectors, so you'll see sort of a slightly lesser overall design applied to these corridors, but still what we're looking for is sidewalks buffered with boulevard. We're looking at high-quality bike lane facilities in beside vehicle traffic. In rural locations, rather than provided behind curb and gutter, we'd be looking for, wherever possible, a pathway at the edge of the right-of-way. Down to our local streets, again, differentiating between urban, suburban, and rural. And then also, very importantly, on the left here, the town center streets. So everything inside the identified town center area. We're looking at, and this is just a slight update from what was in the past Transportation Master Plan, but importantly, what it does prescribe is in the sidewalk zone is a full 4 meters from back of sidewalk to curb. And within that, importantly, is this idea of a pedestrian through zone, and that's a clear 2 meters where people will walk or roll, and where things like street trees, street lights, benches, garbage bins, etc., they don't go there. That location must remain clear, and that's where people walk and they roll. Some other elements to the Complete Streets section include management strategies for public streets. So we talk about a neighborhood traffic management and specifically a traffic calming policy that would identify the conditions that must be in place for the district to consider pursuing traffic calming. So there's real clear criteria for that. It also gets into parking management and parking regulations, both for development, off-street through development, as well as for managing on-street public supplies. The last section in section B is number 8, new mobility and integration. And so this is more of a forward-looking section where it's dealing with addressing emerging and future mobility options. So there's emphasis put on electric vehicles and the network of charging stations that might be required to support increased uptake of electric vehicles. It also talks about electric bicycles and what might be done to improve the user safety and comfort and appeal of e-bikes. It also talks about ride hailing, which is an idea that's not quite here yet in the region, but it sort of sets the stage and begins the conversation for what might happen when it arrives. And lastly, transportation demand management. And so a lot of this plan is around infrastructure and what we want to build in order to encourage travel of a certain type or certain characteristic. Demand management is actually about targeted programs and policies that encourage people to travel in different ways than they currently do. And that can be targeting delaying investment in expensive infrastructure by yielding or making use of capacities that are already in your network. Okay, so shifting gears into the plan portion of the Transportation Master Plan, similar to what Catherine spoke to earlier, we've got projects and actions identified on 4 different time frames. The emphasis of the implementation section is on the first 10 years, the 0 to 5 and the 5 to 10 year time frames. Some of the key action items specific to policies, regulations, studies, and programs are on the screen, and so I'll go through each of these. Your upcoming OCP revision, bringing in the Transportation Master Plan network maps and supporting policies. Your subdivision servicing standards bylaw, there's a number of facility design related items throughout the TMP. Complete street cross sections, active transportation design standards, both for walking and cycling. There's updates required to that bylaw to make sure they align with some of the key design directions in the Transportation Master Plan. Another key bylaw piece is your off-street parking requirements. And so we talk in the TMP about what off-street parking needs might be and how they may have changed over time and should be considered in coordination with your land use planning and this sort of new emphasis, or maybe it's more significant emphasis on alternative modes. And so making sure that that is reflected in your zoning bylaw through your off-street parking requirements. Some other items, updates to the development cost charges bylaw to make sure it reflects this new project list that's in the Transportation Master Plan, a neighborhood traffic calming policy, which I talked about earlier, a bicycle count program. So this is something that more communities are doing these days, and it's really to, document and understand the impact that investments in infrastructure, investments in programs are having on getting more people out riding a bike. And last item there is around securing external funding. And so currently there's a fair bit of external, whether provincial or federal funding available specifically to support investments in active transportation, accessibility and universal design, as well as public transit and road safety. So we're suggesting a real active pursuit of external funding to fund those investments. And then shifting over to infrastructure, to capital investments. So the priority items, these are meant to be 0 to 10 year items. So there are others beyond this that aren't prioritized in the implementation plan. These are the ones we're suggesting are prioritized. And so a few key ones to highlight perhaps, through road extension. So that's the piece between Charters and Phillips Road. And that's a key piece to provide an alternative to travel on Highway 14, as well as to continue this east-west cycling and walking corridor, connecting schools, key parks, the town center, etc. Roddenite, another key active transportation corridor, so suggesting investment in cycling and walking facilities, the length of that corridor, connecting Otter Point Road to the schools. Brailsford Place is another one where it's a rather modest investment in terms of financial, but will go a long way in terms of connecting up a disconnected street network in the northwest portion of Souk. A couple more to highlight. Phillips Road, so the piece basically between where Throop would connect with Phillips in future, just north of Sea Park, with Highway 14, and providing good quality roadside walking and cycling facilities along that corridor. And the last two I wanted to highlight are actually at the bottom of this list, is establishing funds to invest in bus stops. And so you've got a number of bus stops throughout Souk that have basically nothing or very little in the way of passenger amenities, shelter, signs, benches, etc. And so a targeted program that would allow you to go around and incrementally make investments in those locations. And similarly on accessibility improvements, so things like curb ramps, or dealing with excessive cross grades, or dealing with particularly tricky crossings, a targeted program that would go around and make improvements specific to accessibility. So I will summarize here, bringing it back to both master plans again, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but our next steps as we see them, public engagement in early to mid-July, so we've preliminarily targeted that July 9th date. From there, there'd be an update and finalization of these documents you see in front of you, so that would take in both feedback and guidance from council, as well as consideration of what we hear from the public in July, and those would come back to council for more formal endorsement, most likely in September. So with that, I will conclude, and thank you for your time. And I think I'm here, and Catherine's still here with any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much for the presentation. So open it up to council for comments and questions. I have a few, but I'll go to Councillor Beddoes first.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, again, I'm very, very pleased with the quality of what we have here. So maybe a little bit impatient, but I've been waiting for this report for some time. And the reason being is it's sort of a launching pad for some of the changes that we need in our community. And you touched on a lot of them, of course. One, of course, is the big one, that 75% of the people that live in our community work elsewhere, and unfortunately they use their cars. And I like how you've incorporated the cars with the cycling and any other mode of transportation to get around. Connectivity, it's been a big bugaboo. You've touched on that, and there's some information in there which would be very useful to myself and my colleagues. The width of subdivision roads, you've touched on that, which are too narrow. I mean, you go down some of these newer subdivisions and it's like a ping ball ball going down the road, bouncing from side to side, trying to get around the cars that have one tire on the pavement or on the sidewalk. No room for a kid on a bike. Very, very dangerous. Off-street parking, again, recognize that we're not in a very good state when it comes to off-street parking, and some suggestions there. I like your thing about bus stops. Right, it does. We have people, I don't remember, years ago, the Lions Club in Souk built a bunch of concrete ones because the kids going to school were standing out in the rain. And since then, of course, with transit, the ones downtown are pretty good, but anywhere else, they're not very good. So I'm glad you touched on that. Overall, very, very pleased. Thank you for all your hard work, although we did pay you for it, so it's not too bad. But anyways, yes, you give me lots to deal with and lots to think about. Some very good stats here that can be useful to our staff here in Souk. And again, I see great things coming from it. One of them, of course, is we can pick a few projects and get them shovel ready. So when we do get a grant, we can apply for that grant and have something to give them right away. And this lends a lot to that. So thanks again.
Thank you, Councillor. Other councillors? Councillor Bateman?
Jump in. Thank you very much. Again, exciting short and long-term master plan we can unfold over the decades, ideally. Dan, you were involved with Boulevard, I believe, when the last transportation plan. Is that correct? Yeah. So
For me, yep.
yeah. So I'm similar to what I asked Catherine. When you look back at that plan, which seemed to be very motor-centric, we've reversed the priorities here in this plan, for one thing. The question might be, what has shifted between then and now?
Yeah, I would love to answer that. It's a great question. And so if I think back, I know one of the sort of key challenges in implementing the 2009 version of the TMP was that the project list was long and quite expensive. And perhaps, might have been more than realistically could have been pursued in a 10 or a 12-year time frame, which is kind of typical for the life of a master plan like this. And so this go around, we've made a concerted effort to develop a project list that we think is more reasonably achieved in that time frame. And you'll see sort of the financial component of it is a lot lower than what I recall from a lot lower than from the 2009 plan. So I think there's that. And then I think another key piece, and you touched on it, is there is now a real shift in emphasis toward walking and cycling and public transit as well. And so I think there's sort of two aspects to that. One is that there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in Souk, because there's a lot of pre-existing rural roads where there's limited shoulders, or there's work to be done. I think there's that. But then when we get back to this project list and the financial implications of it, investments in sidewalks or investments in trails, or even repurposing street space to create room for bike lanes, the price tag on those kinds of improvements is much less than building new roads or even intersection signal upgrades, roundabouts. So I think from that perspective, this new emphasis on, it's not new, but the increased emphasis on active transportation also bears out in the slightly lower financial implications of the plan this time around.
Yeah, on. Here, I'll pull that over. Again, I'll just nitpick a bit here. One thing I noted regarding the existing and projected data on traffic impacts, I'm wondering, for example, comparing, I think it was 2017 with 2038, our CRD regional growth strategy population projections says we'll have about 50% more residents here, up to 22,000. And yet, your traffic impact projection suggests on the Phillips Road to Otter Point section, to use an example, that will be increasing about 5,000 vehicles per day over the next number of years. So has an assumption been made that we'll be making substantial progress on smart growth and mode shift by 2038?
Yeah, there's an element of that baked into these figures. The work that's behind this is linked up with those CRD growth projections, and so that was the starting point for this analysis. And you're referring to the map 5 on page 40, I think it is. And so we took that as a starting point. You can project out an estimated number of vehicle trips based on an increase in, it's not people necessarily, it's households or commercial or industrial floor area. And we project it out and impose it on the network, and we can use traffic model to estimate where those trips are going to go and then where they're going to impact. The other thing we're able to do here is look at the CRD population projections as a whole, but then zoom in a little bit more specific to Souk and go, okay, in which locations is that growth actually going to occur? And that's reflected out in some of the traffic volume figures you see on those maps.
Okay. I really appreciated the short-term clarity around our priority intersections and complete streets, and also with the ultimate street build-out. I thought that was very interesting, and with a clear definition of the challenges of, for example, connecting Pasco Road to Sun River. I was interested also that you tackled quite briefly the Highway 14 alternative route. And I don't know if we're in a final draft version or final version of this document, but I'd like to see challenges to that alternative route be listed in that section, because I know that that is a favorite topic here in Souk. Now, the Ministry of Transportation, of course, in its Highway 14 corridor study, has indicated the fiscal challenge. I think it is some crazy $100,000 a kilometer or $1 million, so those kind of numbers, just to clarify that. And then the other big issue that I've always heard here in Souk over nearly 20 years now is the second bridge crossing. And I may have missed this, as I did with the bike trail crossing, but I don't believe that's been addressed in this plan. Was there? Yeah.
So there is, and Catherine touched on it earlier, active transportation, a walking, cycling bridge, roughly in line with the through extension.
And then there was the issue of the actual second car bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's been identified as one of the ultimate build-out routings, but not in the medium or short-term time frame.
Right. Okay. All right. And I guess the key thing here for us working with limited budgets is that the Ministry of Transportation would be a key partner in any of these major intersection upgrades, right, along the highway here at Otter Point, Phillips, and Church. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Other councillors? So I just have a few comments and questions. Would like a bit more information just on traffic calming. I see in here that there's the diagram with some, where are we? Some just potential options to consider. And also in 7.4 under neighborhood traffic management. And then also sort of how to pursue neighborhood traffic management. Because this is coming up quite frequently, you know, whenever we have discussions on rezoning or variance and the like, is just the amount of traffic, and then it sort of comes up in different pockets around the communities where there's concerns about safety. So I guess I'm trying to frame my question here, but one thing that's come up before is residents in the past have asked for speed humps or speed bumps, and then it's been suggested that those are discouraged for various reasons. I've heard from more of a public safety, like an ambulance would have to slow down and then to navigate over. But then I see it in here as a common neighborhood device. And I know that we have, you know, there's obviously a picture where they do have some. And then it's in the timeline to do that. But I almost sense that there's more urgency required to start implementing these around Souk sooner rather than later, because then that is a concern from, and it's a very valid concern from residents, and often we hear they don't support the rezoning because of the added traffic, because everyone is already speeding and disregarding the safety of the neighborhood. So it comes up frequently, and so how would we sort of tackle that? What would be an appropriate timeline? And I wouldn't mind just some comments about the speed humps there. So that's sort of one piece. Maybe I'll start with that, and then I have two other items on transit and Highway 14.
Okay. Really good question, really good comment. And I think traffic calming or neighborhood traffic management, it's the plan, the direction given in the plan is to pursue developing a policy. And we think that is, rather than to jump to the conclusion that this location gets a speed hump and that one gets the traffic circle or whatever it might be, is that we take a half step back and define for yourselves, for staff, for the community, what the shared expectations are around traffic calming. And that process is to define which streets are eligible, which are not. So, for example, local streets, that is typically where you would traffic calm. An arterial, you probably don't want to traffic calm an arterial. They're meant to handle large volumes of vehicles. And then what you need to do is make sure that that policy clarifies what conditions must be present for the district to go, okay, yes, this street is eligible for traffic calming. Now let's figure out which devices, whether it's a speed hump, a traffic circle, or whatever. And so the conditions that typically are included in something like that are vehicle speeds. So average vehicle speed is above what a desirable level would be on a neighborhood street, and therefore we want to calm to slow cars down. Vehicle volumes, too many cars on a local street. So we've actually just defined the upper limit for what a local street is intended to hold. And so if a street were approaching or exceeding that level, then that would be a candidate for traffic calming devices that reduce the number of cars. And another one is actually, it's related, but is shortcutting, where you've got not necessarily too many cars, but you've got a high percentage of the cars on a local street that aren't beginning or ending there, they're just cutting through. And that's an issue we can calm as well with traffic calming. So we are suggesting that a policy is established that will guide the execution of traffic calming before actually diving into starting to do actual installations of traffic calming.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. So I'm just curious, and this may be more for our staff to answer, but how soon can we get that policy going? I think it'll come up in the public open house. I'll be sort of surprised if it doesn't. We can already see that there's a comment from a survey respondent within the plan. And then even on the front page of Church, that we see Church Road, like people come flying down this hill. It's really dangerous, either to cross it or just in general, the amount of speed. And then I often find, and then, like I said, there's different neighborhood groups that are reaching out continually. We've moved the speed reader sign around to try to capture that. It works maybe short term until somebody tampers with it, and then it just goes back, and it's just an ongoing, and I think just every application it comes up. So I think, to me, it's something we really need to move on sooner rather than later. I just don't quite understand. In the timeline, it looks like it's a ways out, so, whereas I feel it needs to be a priority item.
So Paul, if I could you comment on the data that we collect from the speed reader board? The roads that we get complaints that there is high speed, is that actually proven out with the data?
Thanks for that. Through your worship, we have a report that has summarized all of the 2019 spots where we put the speed reader board in. There's a number of factors that we have to remind ourselves that contribute to the sense of being on a street unsafe between pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. Not only is that the speed of the vehicle itself, it's also the proximity of the pedestrian or cyclist to that driver, whether or not there's a sidewalk, whether that sidewalk is separated, whether there's a bike lane, multi-use pathway, etc. So on Wadhams, we don't get any complaints because they're very much separated with that, ditch and buffer. But where we do get the complaints is where there's really no sidewalk or limited sidewalk and the perception of speeding. So in some cases where perhaps there's a grade, vehicles are shown to be non-compliant with the speed zone. Oftentimes, a lot of our roads are curvilinear. lots of curves, and the perception of speeding is really a lot higher than it actually is. But in those circumstances, this is typically in the area between our new neighborhoods and the town center, where we don't have very much in the way of infrastructure, sidewalks or any bike infrastructure. So it's pedestrians and cyclists all in the same laneway as the vehicle. And that's where I get a lot of the complaints. And, you know, the speed of the vehicle doesn't tell the whole message. It's everybody trying to share the same space, and there's conflict there. So we can talk about traffic management, but that also, you know, creating a space for pedestrians and cyclists also minimizes or helps mitigate that whole perception of safety.
So, Your Worship, what I think I'm hearing is really is going to take a more of a holistic strategy, and that may mean separation from different modes of traffic. It may mean building sidewalks, just a policy for local traffic management, the demand side, may not actually get us what we think we will get from a policy. So some of the other improvements, like sidewalks and some of the other facilities that are in the transportation master plan, will likely be a lot more important than the policy.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I appreciate that. I just find that, like every rezoning application, there are folks that raise valid concerns and oppose it, and councillors also oppose the rezoning, which I appreciate and respect as well. So it's an ongoing issue because of traffic. The other one now that I've noticed, I live in Sun River. There's sidewalks in most of the areas, but for physical or social distancing, we keep crossing the roads back and forth to allow people to pass safely. And you see that happen in various neighborhoods everywhere when you come over, you know, especially if you have a dog and you need more room. And then people don't stop and they fly past, and we have groups of residents that are sort of watching the speed, and then of course lodge in valid service complaints or service requests for something to be done, and they're frustrated. So it's not just in Sun River, but it's in other areas as well. So I just want to find a way to be able to actually demonstrate that we're finding a way to respond and listen and to do something in various areas around Souk. And then we have infill development, which meets all the smart growth points, but then there's no infrastructure. So of course the residents there don't want to see more infill because it's just adding to more traffic problems. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can move on some of these measures. When a new development is being planned, it's a lot easier, but even in some cases our new developments are heavily congested. So that's not necessarily working because some areas are just packed solid, and then you know, and it's a growth, it's the impact of growth, and that's where we're hearing now, like, stop approving developments and put a moratorium. There's been comments made, like, put a moratorium on until other things catch up. But then it would render us without the revenue to be able to do anything. So I'm just sort of stuck in terms of how we can move forward on it. I don't know what the answer is. So that's where I was looking for something a bit more, here's the magic bullet, but I don't know that there is one now.
No, and I think concentrating on the major corridors, and I think the Transportation Master Plan and the relatively modest budget that's suggested over the next 10 years, $19.2 million. I think that's a Class D estimate. If we make moves on that and try and make these corridors, I don't think it's the concentration on the neighborhood side that you're asking about, but I think that will go a long ways to showing people that we understand this change and we do want to concentrate on multimodal, and these are the corridors that we're going to be working on in the short term. I'm not sure, Dan or Paul, you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add, because Paul, you've spent a lot, or Mr. Butterfield, you've spent a lot of time engaging with the residents in Sun River to try to find a way to calm traffic there. And what's happening now is residents are parking their vehicles on both sides of the road to slow traffic, and that's making it more dangerous now as people try to cross the road to social distance, because now there's blind spots on both sides. It's an unsafe, and depending on when the sun sets, you can't see. So it's creating another safety challenge, and this is where we're seeing residents trying to find their own strategic ways to slow traffic.
Yeah, through your worship, I'll say that there is no silver bullet. This is a complex issue that all municipalities deal with. That goes on and on. It takes, I would say, a person who really understands the complexity of traffic calming to go ahead and make that policy that you're looking for. It has to be uniform throughout the whole district, and the nuances are difficult and complex to deal with. I will say that I'll back up Norm's statement that the TMP really, as we create and connect this, and connectivity is one of our big themes of the TMP. Once we start connecting things, drivers will start walking and cycling through these areas. They'll get out of their vehicles. It chips away at this issue of feeling unsafe with vehicles. So the TMP works to our advantage. And again, there are so many conflicting factors that contribute to pedestrian safety and the feel of safety in neighborhoods that you really have to take your time in developing that policy and expectation.
Okay, no, that's fair, Mr. Butterfield. Thank you. In terms, Councillor Bateman touched on this, in terms of Highway 14 alternate, I guess what I was looking for here was just to see if there could be a proposed map in the future of ways for traffic to move if the highway is closed. So while there are significant dollars being invested in Highway 14, we still run into a point that if a tree falls across the highway, the road is shut. And that could, I say that because that one actually did happen last year, and it actually had the Premier and the Minister of Health stuck in our community. So that helped because at least they understand what we're talking about when that occurs. But there's no way around, whereas other areas, there's a way around. So I was just looking to see if there was anything available for us to progress. Now, this is mainly Casinos sort of entering into North Souk area. We don't see a lot of development changes there, but should something emerge, I just don't want to see the opportunity for us to find some way to create something to be able to flow traffic through. So I was just sort of looking, if it's not out there, then it doesn't happen. So how easy or how could we incorporate something that would enable us to be able to plan for it? Because it's still a reality, even after the improvements, if something happened between Cooper's Cove and the 17 Mile, or now I can't think of the road, Ludlow, and we're shut, we're completely shut. It's the same problem.
I'll take a first stab at that, Your Worship. But there is a connection now between Manzer and Gillespie that will take some of that pressure off. But it really, we're at the will of where Mother Nature decides to lay down a disruption on Highway 14. But I thought that piece that transportation did to get that connection between Manzer and Gillespie was really, it was brilliant. It was a nice job.
No, that's a good reminder. I'm thinking then between Manzer and Harborview, because then you can start to go around. You can start to detour around some of our roads, and you can sometimes go down Ludlow and Gateway. There's the diversion routes to get folks moving, but there's just a couple of areas where we're still stuck. So that it's just that, and I think that when folks know that the road there's an accident or some kind of closure, but it's single alternating, you know that you can move and get home, as opposed to it's closed and wait and see what happens. It's really tough for families, and well, for anyone actually that needs to get in and out. whether it's for medical or emergency or whatever. Like, you need to know there's a comfort in knowing you can get home or get out. It just might take a little longer, as opposed to it's closed, you're not going at all. So is there any way to look into like a?
Yeah, on the north side, the Harborview side, but again, that connector, Manzer to Gillespie, you can use Happy Valley, you can use Kangaroo Road. There are ways now to get around some of the issues that were on Highway 14.
Yeah, it's more on our side though, where we still have a gap that we need to work around. So there's that. And just the other piece on bus stop, I do agree. It's just we run into challenges even most recently where there was a proposed bus, like in front of the Knox Vision, there was to be a bus pull in, and then and that was all set to go, and then the last council pulled it out. So now the opportunity to actually create a stop in there is gone. So and of course the transit plan shows more transit coming down there. Now the bus will stop, unfortunately, in the middle of the road because there's nowhere for it to go. So I just think, yeah, I just look forward to more, maybe, I know staff will do what they can, but more like a strong recommendation, like when those opportunities come up, we do them, because it's lost now. And we want more transit to feed through, but it's just a lost opportunity. So I appreciate that piece being put in there. And I also appreciate just how everything is linking together. So the work with this Capital Regional District and also with transit, so that we're developing something that is consistent and not conflicting with those other plannings that are out there. Okay, anything from anyone? Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, again, I want to thank everyone for the work that's gone into this. And I'm glad to hear that your comments about preserving these corridors, because over time, going back 90 years or so, the original plan was that Grant Road would connect with Throop or some other corridor through that way, and that would become Highway 14, because the way Souk has developed over the years, the plan was always to move the downtown toward the water. And the way it's developed, everyone thinks of Highway 14 as Main Street, and it's not a main street, it's a provincial highway. And so having a bypass where traffic can move through to the north would allow us to move the town center toward the harbor, which is our greatest natural asset, and it's all but forgotten in most of the plans that have happened over the years. We've just sort of developed the main transportation corridor that was originally planned. And so, yeah, preserving these corridors is a key component to making sure that we get this done over time.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments from members of council? Okay, or Councillor Bateman?
Congestion on the road, right? And that seems to be the biggest factor as an increase over the years on Highway 14 during rush hours. So the Throop Road connector at 4.4 million, how much congestion will that relieve off of 14, do you think?
It's a really good question or comment. I don't have the exact answer. I think what it is going to do primarily is local trips within Souk. More of them won't need to go down to Highway 14 to get from either end to the town center and back. More of those can happen on Throop and Grant than are happening now.
Right.
And so that'll mean that the through trips, the more trips that are more regional, that are more highway type trips, will more than likely still be on the highway, but it's those local trips that'll be not necessarily depend on the highway.
Okay. I know that we budgeted for a blueprint for this Otter Point up to Wadham's Way redesign. How much of that hill needs to be shaved off, in your opinion? Do we need to Yeah.
Difficult to say for certain. Shaving off the hill would be about improving sight lines, sight distances, and how far you need to see in either direction is dependent on how quickly you or other motorists are moving. And so it's really kind of got to be a bit of an integrated approach where we both manage the operating characteristics of those streets in consideration of any geometry changes that are needed to shave off the hill to improve sightlines, we'll say. And so that's where that whole stretch should be looked at in coordination, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, and in the previous plan, roundabout first policy, and I know you've cited a roundabout at Church and Throop as an essential. Do you believe a roundabout at Otter Point and Wadham's Way?
It's not in here as something that needs to be done imminently, but it absolutely could be part of the long-term solution for that corridor. Roundabouts work well when the 3 or the 4 legs are relatively balanced in the amount of traffic coming and going, and that is the case in that location. So it could be a good fit. The challenge will be design-wise with some of the grades and the slopes and the crest and the hill through there and how that all comes together.
Now, I just want to comment on Mr. Butterfield and the fact that we're losing him shortly. So the two of you worked very extensively on this project together.
Yes, we did. This is
Yeah.
Paul here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Both Dan and I worked a long time on this, and I really feel like this is a balanced approach for Souk, and takes into consideration kind of the new approaches of active transportation and some of the unique characteristics of Souk. So I think it's really balanced. I really think Dan has done a tremendous job for us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Butterfield. A great legacy for you, leaving Souk, and well wishes. But you'll be with us on the Zoom meeting, I understand?
I'll actually be in Mission. I can make myself available since we're looking at more of a 5 to 7 public engagement. So that's something that we can negotiate for sure if Souk deemed that they wanted me there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McInnes?
Just 2 very quick questions. Dan, you talked about the menu of facility types that should go into bylaw 404, and I'm wondering, in your experience, whether we should have some sort of criteria to not allow the developer to gravitate to the lowest cost or lowest common denominator. Do you have any comments on how we make that work with the menu type suggestion?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what we have are the cross sections that are in the Appendix B, and those would be, in our mind, those would be in the bylaw. Those would be the required. And then the hope is the menu of facility types, they apply to not just development related frontage work or street work, but also public stuff that you or the ministry might be leading. And so I think what is in the complete street cross sections, which would become regulation, is sort of the highest order or the higher order of the, specifically on the cycling side of things, as well as on the sidewalks. And then I think the menu approach then provides some flexibility where either in staff's determination or just because of the constraints of a corridor or a particular location or whatever, the full cross section can't be achieved. Then there's the ability to kind of work down on the menu if something else might be better applied.
Thank you. And just one last, if I could, Your Worship. Did you engage transportation at all on the MOU and how committed they are to that MOU still? Or is that a piece of work that we need to yet do?
Paul, are you comfortable speaking to that?
Yeah, certainly. We sent our first draft report to the ministry, and they were busy. They didn't get back to us on anything related to that. The only conversations we had about the MOU in the very beginning was when they sent it to us just to make sure that we had all the information. I think that's something that we need to reaffirm with the ministry ourselves from staff's perspective, and really get a sense of how we can, number one, both benefit from an alternative or a ministry east-west, district east-west route through grant. And because that will benefit the ministry as well as the municipality itself. So I think there needs to be some work around that MOU, and hopefully we can reconnect again and look at that.
Thank you, and thank you, Your Worship.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our consulting team, and also thank you to Mr. Paul Butterfield for your work and all your energy and commitment on this. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to next steps. So in terms of the, is this now part of the town hall that is happening, or are there separate ones for each plan? I'm just curious about, similar to my question about the Parks and Trails one, are we having that on the same date or a different date?
I'll take that. The plan is to have them both on the same date, and as Catherine suggested, there'll be two Zoom rooms, one for transportation, one for Parks and Trails, and I'm assuming that it's going to be come and go. And please shake your head saying that yes, you can go to both. You don't have to confine yourself to one. One little procedural piece that I want council to be aware of is we'll have recommendations from the committee of the whole that will go to council on July 13th as part of the consent agenda. This meeting is for July 9th, so I'm hoping council is okay ratifying this at the June 13th meeting, which will actually be after the open house. Or July, I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's just, will we get caught in any, would that raise an ombudsman's office concern, or that we're not?
I think the risk is relatively low. I mean, it is a quorum of council here, and I'm assuming that these are going to be passed unanimously. So I think it's fairly safe to say that those same votes will carry through to the ratification of the consent agenda on the 13th.
Okay, it'll be nice just to get on with something sort of before we break a bit in August, and to get as much out if we can. So, okay, I'll leave it in, I'll go with that advice, thank you. And then when we, put forward a resolution, if council has any concerns about that, now would be the time I would want you to express it. I don't, on July 13th, have a concern raised then when it's after the fact. Like, now is when I need to hear from you if you have a problem with that timeline, okay? So we do have the first resolution then is that council receive the Transportation Master Plan draft report for information. Moved by Councillor Beddoes. So discussion, everyone understands that our public virtual town hall will occur on July the 9th, but the ratification of this decision will occur after the fact, and we are okay with that? And if you're not, I want to know today. Councillor Bateman?
Perhaps not related here, but are there opportunities to send in some line changes, suggested line changes, small typos, or?
That would be good. Is the consulting team?
Do you welcome that?
Do we welcome that? We have an expert writer here, so. Yeah. There may be some grammatical.
Your old school marm here.
Just.
If I may, through your worship, I guess if it's something that is really important and changes the intent. I mean, we are going forward with this as a draft plan, and maybe having some imperfections is okay. I already have a list of items that we will be fine-tuning. Nothing that changes major content or intent for the Parks and Trails Master Plan. But like I said, I do have a running list of very small items to change. And so I feel like if we could, and if you're comfortable with it, and if it really is something tiny, is give it to us, we'll add it to that list. And we'll let the public know that these are not final plans, and that, that we do have this list ongoing of things to refine.
Excellent, thank you.
No, that would be good. It is a draft, so that's important to note, and that would be good. Okay, so I'll call, seeing anything further then, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Nope, that's carried unanimously. Thank you so much. And next piece is that council authorizes public engagement on the draft report. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, and we'll look forward to that information session occurring. Thank you so much for that. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that too is carried unanimously. Thank you so much for your work.
Very impressed.
Yeah, it's a they're both very impressive documents, and I just really appreciate the time and energy, and you can actually tell that you were in the area, not just sort of viewing it like from Google Maps or something. Like you really feel that there was like on the street, on the ground work and all that time and consideration. So I really value that, and thank you for that. Okay, so there's no new business today, so I'll just call for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, or pardon me, Bateman. Sorry. Any discussion?
Don't get us mixed up.
No. All in favor? Opposed? And that too is carried unanimously. Thank you so much, and keep safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.